Have you ever worked your whole life for something, only to be told without a word that you don't belong? What if you walked into a showroom ready to buy your dream car, but left in the back of a police cruiser? Would you still believe in dignity? Would you still hold your head high? This isn't just a story about money. It's not even about a car. This is about perception, power, and what happens when success doesn't protect you from suspicion. Because what happened on that Monday morning in Georgia sparked something no one saw coming, a viral storm of public reckoning, and eventually a transformation that reached far beyond any luxury dealership. It was a bright, cloudless Monday in suburban Georgia, the kind of morning where everything feels possible, and for Marcus Bennett it was. Wearing a crisp navy blue suit and a quiet sense of pride, Marcus stepped out of his 10-year-old Honda Accord, not to dream, not to window shop, but to buy in cash the car he'd waited his whole adult life to earn, a brand new, fully loaded Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Silver, sleek, silent, and worth every late night, every sacrifice, every overlooked promotion he'd ever swallowed in silence. Marcus wasn't trying to make a statement. He just wanted to mark a moment, a milestone, one only he truly understood. But someone else saw something different. What happened next wasn't in his control. And it wouldn't be the first time a black man's confidence was mistaken for threat. But this time something changed, so stay with us. Because by the end of this story, you won't just remember Marcus. You'll remember what it means to turn humiliation into impact, to rewrite a moment into a movement. There's something quiet about accomplishment. Not the loud kind people post online, but the kind that lives in long nights, quiet sacrifices, and the invisible miles between where you started and where you finally arrive. For Marcus Bennett, that Monday morning felt like crossing a finish line. Not a race against others, but against doubt. Against the voice inside that once whispered, maybe this dream isn't for you. He had spent the last decade building his life from the ground up. A self-taught programmer, a software engineer, a startup co-founder. His name wasn't famous, his app wasn't flashy, but it worked and it changed everything. So when he pulled into the dealership lot that morning in his 2010 Honda Accord, he didn't feel out of place. He felt proud. The sun gleamed off the rows of polished cars, BMWs, Audis, and Mercedes lined up like prizes. But Marcus already knew what he came for. Not a maybe, not a comparison, not a question. A silver Mercedes-Benz S-Class, top of the line, fully loaded. He had studied every detail, called ahead, and even printed out a checklist. This wasn't just a purchase. It was a moment, a personal ceremony, a quiet nod to the boy he once was, who used to fix old desktops in his neighborhood just to afford a secondhand laptop, who took the bus to his first job in a borrowed blazer, who skipped vacations, upgraded skills, and built something from nothing. That's the thing about dreams. When they finally arrive, they don't always look extravagant. Sometimes they just look earned, but not everyone sees that. When Marcus stepped inside the dealership, a woman at the front desk glanced up, smiled, and then ever so slightly hesitated. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but he noticed, because he had seen it before. A quick scan from head to toe, a whisper to a salesman, and then a man in a tailored suit walked over, slowly, deliberately. "Can I help you?" The tone was polite but tight, edged. Marcus adjusted his tie and smiled. "Yes," he said calmly. "I called this morning. I'm interested in the S-Class out front." The salesman blinked. "You called?" "What name was that?" "Under Marcus Bennett," he replied, extending a hand. The salesman didn't shake it. Instead, he asked, "Do you have financing lined up? I'll be paying in cash." There was a pause. Then laughter. Short, sharp, and loud enough for other customers to hear. "You'll be paying in cash." The salesman looked over Marcus's shoulder as if waiting for someone to jump out and yell, "Gotcha." Marcus reached for his wallet. "Would you like to see proof of funds?" But the salesman wasn't looking. He was already speaking into a walkie-talkie. And that's when the story began to turn. Sometimes the most dangerous thing about a person is not what they've done, but what other people assume they could never do. That moment in the dealership, Marcus didn't lose his temper, didn't raise his voice, but something inside him shifted. Because success can buy you a car. But it doesn't always buy you the benefit of the doubt. What happened next should have been unthinkable. But for Marcus, it wasn't surprising. Because in a world where perception still outweighs proof, even the most accomplished among us can still be seen as a threat, and sometimes success isn't enough. Success changes many things. It changes your zip code. It changes how banks treat your credit score. It even changes how your neighbors wave when you pull into the driveway. But for some people, it doesn't change everything, especially not how they're seen. Marcus Bennett had walked into that dealership with all the right credentials: a high-earning job, a strong bank account, a respectful attitude, a tailored suit. But the moment he said cash, the moment he stepped outside of what people expect from a man like him, that's when the mask dropped. Because in that instant, Marcus wasn't a successful entrepreneur anymore. He wasn't a software engineer. He wasn't a paying customer. To the salesman and the manager watching from behind the tinted glass, he was just a black man saying something that didn't quite add up. You see, there's something that lives in the background of everyday interactions. A silent filter, a flicker in someone's eyes before they speak. It's called implicit bias. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And in places like car dealerships, bank lobbies, or even first-class cabins, it determines who gets offered coffee and who gets asked to wait, who gets trust and who gets questions. This wasn't new. There are countless real stories like Marcus's, like Rashawn Nelson and Dante Robinson, two young black men arrested at a Philadelphia Starbucks in 2018 for waiting for a business meeting without ordering coffee yet. Or Robbie Tolan, a young athlete shot by police in his own driveway, mistaken for a car thief even though it was his family's car. Their stories hit headlines. Marcus's didn't. But in that dealership, he felt it all at once. The weight of every assumption ever made about him, and the irony Marcus had intentionally driven his 2010 Honda Accord that day. Not because he couldn't afford better, but because he'd made a promise to himself years ago: don't buy the luxury until you've earned the foundation. He'd kept that car spotless, maintained it religiously. It was a symbol of patience, discipline. But to the manager peeking through the blinds, it was just proof. Proof that Marcus didn't belong. That's what bias does. It rewrites your story before you've said a word. And no amount of success, no degree, no savings account, no tailored suit can fully erase that first line in someone else's script. Success might open doors, but it doesn't guarantee what's waiting on the other side. Because when people choose suspicion over facts, even the most polished version of yourself isn't enough. So when Marcus stood calmly, wallet in hand, offering proof of his legitimacy, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to protect himself. But the situation had already taken a turn. And the next moment would prove something even more disturbing: that in some spaces, fear travels faster than truth. Because when the walkie-talkie clicked and two police cruisers pulled into the dealership lot, Marcus realized this wasn't just about buying a car anymore. At first, Marcus didn't flinch. When the salesman reached for his walkie-talkie, when he whispered something too quiet to hear, but too purposeful to ignore, Marcus stayed still, wallet open, calm, polite. Because deep down, he knew what was about to happen. It wasn't the first time he'd seen suspicion dressed in professionalism, but when two police cruisers rolled into the parking lot, lights off but urgency clear, his heart sank in a way no promotion, no savings account, no childhood lesson could prepare him for. This was no longer about a car. The dealership manager stepped outside before the officers even reached the doors. "We had a suspicious individual come in," he said smoothly. "No appointment, no financing. Claims he's buying a six-figure car. We just wanted to be safe." Safe. Such a small word. But when used like that, it carries enormous weight and often becomes the excuse that places lives at risk. Marcus stood by the showroom window, hands visible, shoulders relaxed. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind, not because he's paranoid, but because black men in America often have to. One officer approached slowly. "Sir, can we speak with you for a moment?" Marcus nodded. "Of course." He reached deliberately and visibly into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his ID, his business card, a bank statement showing available funds, no sudden movements, no questions asked. Because Marcus knew, in moments like these, tone can be the difference between home and a hospital. The officer reviewed the documents. The other hovered nearby, eyes locked, hand never drifting far from his holster. No crime. No law broken. Just a man trying to buy a car. And yet the tension in the room could cut through glass. That's the thing about fear. It doesn't need facts. It only needs a target. This wasn't just overreaction. It was a pattern. In 2021, a black man named Carlethia Kemp was mistaken for a suspect while buying groceries. In 2022, Jason Jones was followed by police after withdrawing a large sum from his own bank account. Time and time again, suspicion substitutes itself for evidence so long as the person looks like they might fit a narrative. But Marcus didn't fight. He didn't argue. He simply let the truth speak for itself. And eventually, after verifying his name, his account, his intent, the officers handed his documents back. Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. No apology from the dealership. No acknowledgement. Not even a thank you for staying calm under pressure. Just a shrug. Just silence. Just shame. Veiled in professionalism. Sometimes the most painful part of injustice isn't the loud moment when it happens, but the quiet one when no one says a word to make it right. Marcus could have yelled. He could have walked out, slammed the door, posted the video right then and there. But instead, he did something harder. He stayed calm. Because for people like Marcus, every interaction is a test and every reaction becomes a headline. But staying composed doesn't mean staying unaffected. And as Marcus walked toward the door, documents in hand, dignity intact, he heard a voice from across the room call out, "Wait, sir, please." There's a certain kind of calm that isn't natural. It isn't born from peace. It's trained, conditioned. It's the kind of calm you learn not because you want to, but because you have to. That's the calm Marcus carried that morning. Not because he wasn't angry, not because he didn't feel the sting of being treated like a suspect, but because he knew something that many others don't. For a black man in America, losing your temper, no matter how justified, can cost you far more than your dignity. As he stood there watching two armed officers evaluate whether he belonged, Marcus wasn't just managing his emotions, he was managing their perception. That kind of control isn't easy, it's exhausting. Because in moments like these, it doesn't matter who you are on paper. It matters who they think you are, and whether you give them a reason to turn their suspicion into something worse. Marcus had been here before, not here at a car dealership, but in moments that looked different on the outside, yet felt the same on the inside. When he was 19, walking home from class, a neighbor called the cops because he fit a description. He was searched on the sidewalk in front of his dorm. No apology, no explanation. Just fear wrapped in protocol. It didn't make the news, but it stayed with him. That's the weight he carried into adulthood. That's the reason why when the officer asked him for ID, Marcus smiled instead of sighed. Why he moved slowly, clearly, like a man giving a performance he never auditioned for. Because when society doesn't give you the benefit of the doubt, you learn to give them comfort instead. This is the reality of what many call black composure, a strength, yes, but one born from survival. It's the quiet calculation behind every decision. Is this the moment where my tone will decide my fate? Is this the place where my calm will protect my life? There's a cost to that kind of calm. It builds tension in the soul. It teaches young boys to be careful before they learn to be confident. And even when you pass the test, you walk away tired, not triumphant. Sometimes the strongest people in the room aren't the ones raising their voices, but the ones carrying the burden of staying quiet so they don't get silenced permanently. So when Marcus turned to leave that day, papers in hand, pride preserved, he wasn't just walking away from a bad experience. He was walking away from something far older, a system of assumptions, a culture of caution. But just as his hand touched the door handle, a voice interrupted the silence. "Wait, sir, please." Marcus turned, and for the first time that day, someone wasn't treating him like a threat. A tall, sharply dressed man approached not with suspicion, but sincerity. "My name is James Calloway," he said. "I'm the regional director, and I saw everything." And just like that, the story began to shift. Because accountability, real accountability, was about to enter the room. There's a kind of silence that echoes louder than shouting. It fills a room, tightens the air, makes your skin feel like it doesn't quite belong there. That was the silence Marcus felt after the police left. After the officers returned, his documents nodded stiffly and walked away. No crime, No questions, no apology, just the quiet turning of heads, and the unmistakable feeling that everyone had seen something but no one knew what to do with it. Marcus stood still for a moment, not because he was unsure of what to do, but because part of him didn't want to give the room the satisfaction of watching him leave upset. But he could feel the weight of every glance. Some were curious, some uncomfortable, a few even sympathetic, but none brave enough to speak. That's the thing about public humiliation. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up in the form of selective silence, the kind where people pretend they didn't see, where managers turn away, where customers keep browsing cars like nothing just happened. And Marcus, he'd seen that silence before. It reminded him of high school when a teacher accused him of cheating on a math test because his score was too high to be believable. Nobody stood up for him, not even the classmates who knew he'd been tutoring them after school. It reminded him of college when he was followed around a tech store, even though he was the one helping other students pick the right laptops. And now again in a luxury car dealership surrounded by suits and smiles, he was being reminded, respect isn't always given with your resume. The worst part, no one said a word. The receptionist who had smiled at first now avoided eye contact. The salesman was back at his desk, already scrolling through his phone. Even the other customers, many of whom had clearly witnessed the interaction, offered nothing but silence. There's a danger in that kind of bystander quiet, because silence doesn't just ignore injustice, it protects it. This wasn't just about one dealership or one misunderstanding. It was about the way society often handles discomfort by looking away, by pretending it's not their place, by hoping the moment will pass so they don't have to do anything brave. Humiliation isn't just about what's done to you. Sometimes it's about what's withheld dignity, acknowledgement, and most of all, solidarity. Marcus turned to the manager, who still hadn't said a word. "I'll take my business elsewhere," he said simply, and he meant it. But just as his hand reached for the door again, he heard the voice from across the room. "Wait, sir, please." The voice didn't belong to a salesman. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't defensive. It was sincere. "My name is James Calloway," the man said, approaching with purpose. "I'm the regional director, and I want to start by saying I'm sorry, deeply." And for the first time that morning, Marcus heard something he hadn't expected: accountability. But would that be enough? The words were simple. "I'm sorry, deeply." And they came from James Calloway, the regional director, who had seen the entire incident unfold from a conference room window upstairs. He wasn't rushed, wasn't defensive, didn't blame protocol or call it a misunderstanding. He looked Marcus in the eye and said, "What you experienced here today does not reflect our values, and it won't go unanswered." It was for a moment disarming. Marcus wasn't used to that. He was used to being dismissed, ignored, or handed a corporate script, not real ownership. But even as James spoke with sincerity, something inside Marcus held still. Because when you've been hurt by systems before you learn to wait, you wait to see if actions follow apologies. You wait to see if someone actually does the work or just says the words that sound right in public. James continued, "The salesman you dealt with has been dismissed. The manager will face internal review. And if you're willing, I'd like to personally assist you or refer you to a partner dealership where you'll be treated with the respect you deserve." It was a generous offer, and maybe even a genuine one. But Marcus, he wasn't ready to accept. Not yet, because he'd been here before, not this exact room, not this exact suit, but in other moments where sorry came too late to fix what had already been broken. Like the time a client he worked months for dropped his team the day before launch after learning Marcus would be leading the meeting. "We just felt the project needed a different presence," they had said. The apology came later after backlash, after public pressure, but the damage was already done. The pattern always seemed the same: hurt, silence, exposure, then apologies. It's not that Marcus didn't appreciate the gesture. He did, but deep down he wasn't looking for a cleanup crew. He wanted prevention. He wanted something different for the next person who walked through those doors. Someone who might not have the same calm, the same resources, the same ability to defend themselves in the moment. That's the truth about apologies. They don't always close the wound. Sometimes they just acknowledge that one exists, and that's important. But it's not enough. Saying "I'm sorry" is a start, But change doesn't begin until you ask yourself, what am I going to do differently tomorrow? Marcus nodded politely. I appreciate your words, he said, but I'm not sure words are what this moment needs. James didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. I understand, but if you ever change your mind, the offer stands. Marcus left the dealership that day without the car, but not without clarity, because what he needed wasn't just transportation, it was transformation. That night as the sky dimmed and the day settled in his bones, Marcus sat down at his kitchen table, opened his laptop, and told the story. Not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been mistaken for less than they were in places they fully earned the right to be. He clicked post, and within hours the world responded. Marcus didn't post the story to get revenge. He didn't want to destroy anyone's career or watch a company scramble under pressure. He just wanted the truth to be seen, unfiltered, unedited, and unavoidably real. So he wrote what happened, start to finish. Not just the facts, but the feeling. He shared the words that were never said, the looks that lingered, the silence that screamed. He included photos of the car, a screenshot of his bank statement with the personal info blurred. Even a polite reminder, I didn't come looking for trouble. I came to buy a car. Then he hit post. At first it was a few friends, then their friends, then strangers. By midnight it had over 30,000 shares. By morning local news outlets had picked it up. By the end of the week it was on national TV. This is what happens when one story reflects 1,000 unspoken ones. Because people weren't just reacting to Marcus, they were reacting to their cousin, their neighbor, their father, their child. Everyone had some version of that story. Most had never told it. But suddenly Marcus's voice gave them permission to remember, to speak, to be heard. Protesters stood outside the dealership within days holding signs, chanting names, demanding accountability. Customers canceled appointments. Reviews flooded the company's online pages. And the company, responded quickly because now the stakes weren't just personal, they were public. The dealership issued a statement, corporate released a promise, but the internet, it had a memory longer than the press cycle. Because in a world where official channels often protect image over integrity, sometimes the internet becomes the courtroom. Not always fair, not always gentle, but powerful. Other brands reached out to Marcus. So did activists. So did parents. One woman messaged, my son saw your story. He's 16. And he finally understands that what he's felt isn't just in his head. When systems stay silent, stories speak louder. And when people feel powerless alone, they become unstoppable together. Marcus didn't gloat, didn't dunk on the dealership, didn't throw stones. He just kept replying with gratitude. And one reminder, I didn't want to go viral. I just wanted to be treated like anyone else. And then just when Marcus thought the story was done, his phone rang. It was James Calloway again. But this time he wasn't calling to say sorry. He was calling with a question. Marcus, he said, voice quieter now. We don't want another press release. We want to do the work. Would you help us? And that's where a different kind of story began. The second call from James wasn't like the first. There was no rehearsed apology, no damage control. Just a question, soft, honest, and a little uncertain. Marcus, would you consider helping us build real anti-bias training, not just a seminar, not a formality, something honest, something lasting? Marcus didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch, not out of bitterness, but because this time he wasn't going to move faster than the truth. He'd been invited into rooms before. Diversity panels, focus groups, PR campaigns wrapped in polished language. He knew what performative change looked like. The kind where you're only brought in to check a box, to be seen but not heard, to decorate the table, not shape it. So he asked the only question that mattered. Is this about protecting your image or changing your culture? James didn't blink. It's about doing the work, but we need help from someone who's lived it, not someone who read about it in a slide deck. That made Marcus pause, because here was something different, not perfect, not guaranteed, but possible. And that's the hardest thing to offer someone who's been hurt, a reason to trust again. Marcus didn't say yes that day. He said, I'll think about it. And he did. For weeks. He thought about the teenager who messaged him, the mother who said his story gave her son hope, the boy in the parking lot who stared at the S-Class with disbelief, and eventually he called James back. "I'll help," he said, "but here's what I need. No press releases, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies, no glossy photos of me standing next to a PowerPoint." James waited. "This only works," Marcus continued, "if the change is real, even when no one's watching." James agreed. And just like that, Marcus didn't just take a seat at the table, he helped rebuild the table itself. Over the next few months, Marcus consulted quietly. He rewrote their onboarding materials, challenged their assumptions, shared real stories, not just his own, but stories from others who never got the chance to speak. He trained teams, led uncomfortable conversations, and held the company accountable not with anger, but with clarity. Because he knew change doesn't come from shame. It comes from truth, repeated, reinforced, respected. Sometimes the most powerful kind of justice isn't punishment. It's participation with purpose, with boundaries, and with your eyes wide open. A year passed. The dealership changed, new faces, new standards, new stories. And one day Marcus returned, not to buy, not to protest, but to teach. Because transformation doesn't end at the apology. It begins where people decide to listen differently. 1 year later, almost to the day, Marcus pulled into the same dealership lot. But this time, he wasn't in his old Honda Accord. He was driving the silver Mercedes-Benz S-Class he'd bought elsewhere. Quiet, confident, earned. He parked it right up front. Not to make a statement, but because it felt right. He stepped out not as a customer, not as a viral headline, but as a guest speaker, a teacher. Inside the dealership, things looked different. There were new faces behind the counters, fresh posters on the walls, a display that now read, "Excellence begins with respect." And the people, they weren't just ready to listen, they had been preparing to change. James met him at the door with a firm handshake and a quiet smile. "Glad you're here," he said. Marcus nodded. "Glad you meant what you said." The training room wasn't large. Maybe 20 people, sales staff, service reps, even a few regional execs. No spotlights, no cameras, just a circle of chairs. And honesty. Marcus didn't open with data. He opened with a question. "How many of you have ever felt judged before you even spoke?" Hands rose slowly, and not just from the black employees, because bias wears many faces, but so does understanding. He told them the story, his story, the whole thing. From the moment he stepped through those glass doors to the walkie-talkie, to the silence, to the apology that came late, and the work that followed after. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't blame. He just made sure they saw it. Not from the outside looking in, but from the inside out. One employee, a young white salesman, raised his hand. "I think I was taught to trust my instincts," he said. "But no one ever told me that sometimes. Those instincts might be wrong." Marcus smiled gently. "That's the beginning of learning. It's not about never getting it wrong. It's about what you choose to do after." Another staff member, one of the few who had been there a year ago, stood up. She looked nervous. "I wanted to say something that day," she said quietly. "But I didn't. I was scared. I told myself it wasn't my place." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry." Marcus walked over. Not to forgive her, but to thank her for saying it now. That's the thing about redemption. It doesn't erase the past, but it makes space for something new to grow in its place. Sometimes healing begins not when you erase what happened, but when you choose to face it together. That day, Marcus didn't just lead a workshop. He changed a culture. Not overnight, not perfectly, but meaningfully. Because when you walk back into the place that once made you feel invisible and turn it into a space of awareness and learning, you don't just reclaim the room, you redefine it. As Marcus stepped outside later that afternoon, a teenage boy standing on the sidewalk looked up in awe at his car. "Is that yours?" the boy asked. Marcus smiled. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The boy shrugged. "People like me don't really drive cars like that." Marcus paused, then walked over, placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "They used to say the same thing about me." The boy couldn't have been more than 13. He stood at the edge of the sidewalk, backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes fixed on the sleek silver S-Class parked at the front of the dealership. He wasn't gawking. He was imagining, the way kids do when they see something that feels a little too far away, a little too unreal, like a spaceship or a life that's never been handed to someone like them. Marcus saw it right away. Not just the curiosity in the boy's eyes, but the hesitation behind it. The boy wasn't just admiring the car. He was measuring the distance between where he was and where he thought he'd never be allowed to go. Thinking about getting one of these someday, Marcus asked, smiling. The boy shrugged. Just dreaming, he said. People like me don't really drive cars like that. Marcus paused. He'd heard those same words before. When he was 12 and told a teacher he wanted to start his own business someday. When a guidance counselor once suggested he aim for a trade instead of college just to be safe. When even well-meaning people gave him compliments that weren't really compliments. You're so well-spoken. I wouldn't have guessed you were from that part of town. It wasn't always meant to hurt, but it always meant the same thing. You're not what we expected, and we never expected much. So Marcus knelt down, looked the boy in the eye, and said, they used to say the same thing about me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his old business card, the one from before everything changed, the one he kept as a reminder. This, he said, is what I started with. No one gave me permission, no one handed it to me, but I kept showing up. I kept working. The boy took the card like it was gold. Listen, Marcus continued. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have it all figured out. But don't let anyone convince you that dreaming big is out of reach, because it's not. The boy nodded slowly, then smiled. A real smile, like something had cracked open and let in light. Hope isn't a luxury. For many, it's a lifeline. And sometimes all it takes is one voice, one moment to plant a seed that grows into something none of us can yet imagine. Marcus watched the boy walk away, card in hand, step a little lighter. And for a moment, the pain of that morning a year ago felt a little smaller. Not erased, but redeemed. Because dignity isn't just reclaimed, it's passed forward. He turned back toward the dealership, where change was still unfolding, quietly, imperfectly, but truly. And as he got into his car and drove off, he didn't just leave behind a building. He left behind a message, a reminder, a truth. That sometimes when dignity meets determination, even the ugliest moments can be rewritten into something powerful. And that anyone, no matter how they look, where they come from, or what others expect of them, can become the reason someone else dares to believe. So the next time you see someone standing outside a place they were never meant to belong to, don't just look away, look again, because they just might be writing the next story that changes everything. Stories like Marcus's don't end when the car drives away. They echo in hallway conversations, in the way someone pauses before making a judgment, in the questions we dare to ask, and the ones we stop being afraid to answer. Because this wasn't just about one man, one dealership, or one misunderstanding. It was about a pattern, a mirror, a system of quiet walls that too many people have learned to walk around instead of walk through. But here's the thing. When a story is told truthfully, without bitterness, but with courage, it does something powerful. It makes people look again. It invites reflection. And it opens the door to change. That's what Marcus did. He didn't fight back with rage. He didn't disappear in silence. He turned a moment of humiliation into a movement of awareness. He took the seat they tried to deny him and used it to make space for others. Every time we choose to speak, to share, or to listen differently, we widen the path for someone else to walk through. And that's how real change begins. So if this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something you've seen or something you felt, don't let it stop here. Leave a comment, share the story, subscribe if you believe these conversations matter. Because the more we talk about it honestly, openly, and with heart, the fewer people will have to walk Marcus's path alone. This is That Person Was Me, and you're part of what comes next.